Good. Okay. So let's let's jump into our second session, and let's actually look at some of the details of what is actually in the suitcase. Yeah. So now we get to find this lost suitcase and look at what's inside. What are some of the letters? What are some of the stories that can be told about the impact of Christianity in culture and society? Now, some of us are used to thinking about theology as something that is very irrelevant. Someone has depicted theologians that ask incredibly detailed and complicated questions, finding answers to problems no one has and solutions that no one is interested in. Sometimes that can be true. But I'm convinced that theology, which is engaging our mind with the truth and the reality of God, is the most foundational study for the goodness of the world. And I'd like to show you how, in European culture in particular, this has fleshed out in over 2,000 years of history. So we're going to look at 8 brief sketches of the theological grounding in European culture, where the light has been shining, where the glory has been shown. So let's start with philosophy. And may I just, a personal word, if there's anyone here who might be inspired by some of what I've said to want to study philosophy at university level, that is a very good thing. Might I encourage you first to get some theology under your belt? That will give you criteria, it will give you tools, it will give you a security as you enter into the rough waters of the great thinkers, to be able to have your theological thinking cap on as well, to have your armor, your breastplate, your belt, and your sword firmly in place. We start with philosophy, and to talk about theology and philosophy, because I believe that philosophy is at the base of the iceberg of all cultures. What we see in a culture is usually the tip of the iceberg. And we usually scratch around on the tip of the iceberg. But down below, under the waters, where only a few dare to go because it's cold and it's dark, are the thinking minds, are the books that have been published in universities that no one has ever read. But they have been shaping the cultures and the expressions of what we then see in our cultures at the surface. And the first issue that we notice in thinking theologically about our culture and philosophy in particular is the grand alignment of some of the grand Christian ideas with some of the grand philosophical systems that have laid the foundations of Europe. They are not necessarily always in opposition. There's actually oftentimes a happy marriage, even an influence that has happened between the two. We do this because we believe in a doctrine called common grace. We believe that God is at work in the world, yes, through the church, yes, through the Holy Spirit in the lives of those that believe in Jesus Christ, but God is also at work in the world through those who do not believe in God. In a partial way, in a limited way, but God can move the heart of the king to do things that are good. And so God can sometimes speak through the donkeys, and certainly he has spoken and said some good things through the philosophers. And I want to give you just one example of this, which is the philosophical system of Stoicism. Now, Stoicism is a philosophy that rose out of Greece, so it's an ancient philosophy, and it developed in a prevalent way in the Roman Empire. So we have some of the great thinkers in the Roman Empire, Seneca, Cicero, Marcus Aurelius. Some of these great philosophers and thinkers in the Roman Empire were Stoics. And in many ways, the philosophy of Stoicism was what made Rome great. And I say that as a born Roman. And it also set the foundations of much European culture. A lot of what you see in the tip of the iceberg today in Europe can be traced back to the roots of Stoicism. Now, just by the way, in the New Testament, the person of Paul, the Apostle Paul, who we know very much about, he was born in Tarsus. Tarsus so happened to be one of the chief seats of Stoicism in the ancient world. Paul was also very well versed in Stoic philosophy. You can see in Acts chapter 15, in his speech in Athens, he quotes by heart many Stoic philosophers. Interestingly, in Acts chapter 18, do you remember Paul is being judged in Achaia by a consul by the name of Gallio. Gallio happens to be Seneca's brother. Seneca, who was the main Stoic philosopher in Rome, his brother judges Paul in the book of Acts. And there's many people who have written about ancient Christianity and Stoicism and how these two systems actually entered into dialogue with each other. Stoicism aligns with Christianity in many things. For example, providence. The Stoics believed that all things are determined by a greater power, which sounds vaguely familiar. The Stoics believed that the world is a community in which all men are brothers. That also sounds vaguely Christian. The Stoics believed that it was man's duty to align himself to the laws of nature, which also sounds vaguely Christian. The Stoics said that peace can be found in not setting too high value on things that can be taken away, for the possessions of the world are vanity. Reason, according to the Stoics, was the divine spark that makes us different from animals. And goodness, to be good, is the essence of human life. Now, I could go on and on. I'm not going to lecture on Stoicism. But just enough to show you that in this grand system of philosophy that's at the foundation of European culture, we have significant overlap and interface with Christian thinking and with Christian theology. But there's many others. We could go on and look at many others in the history of European philosophy, great philosophers who also happen to be convinced Christians. Soren Kierkegaard, who is the father of existentialism, was a devout Christian. He read his Bible every day. His mission as a philosopher was to bring Christianity back into Christendom. He was a man with a mission, and he felt it was a theological mission. And he wrote philosophy that the world continues to study today, as was Dostoevsky, also a fine Christian. But other philosophers as well. Locke was a Christian. Pascal was a Christian. Immanuel Kant was a Christian. Rousseau and Hegel were Christians. Descartes was a Catholic, devout. He was profoundly religious. And in his famous Cogito ergo sum, for him, that was the first step to establish the existence of God. Descartes, the founder of European rationalism, did his philosophy thinking, how can I establish the glory of God through my thinking and my philosophy? Now that has been ripped out, and all we have left is his rational thinking. But he was a Christian, as many others. Francis Bacon said, "It is true that a little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy brings men's minds to religion." Many of the great philosophers of Europe were Christians. And when Christianity is attacked and debunked, Europeans need to be careful because they're cutting the roots of their great thinkers as well. So that's number one. 7 to go. Second, a theology of science. Now, oftentimes, Christianity is pitted against science. Have you heard that? Yeah? You know, oh, you're a Christian. Right, yeah. So you don't believe in science, do you? Yeah. You're like, you know, the ones who wanted to, you know, burn Galileo. You know, you still think the earth is flat, don't you? Because that's what the Bible says. And of course, we have some very popular authors like Richard Dawkins, who's written books, The God Delusion. Have you heard of The God Delusion? Yeah, it had a time when it was the flavor of the day in many, at least in the UK. Everybody's reading The God Delusion, and they're thinking, oh, this brilliant biologist from Oxford all of a sudden knows everything about philosophy. Well, he was a good biologist. I don't think he was a very good philosopher. Certainly not a very good thinker. But there's this popular sort of feeling and thinking that if you're a Christian, and I use the word obscurantist, which means that you are in obscurity, you're in the darkness, you've got blinders over your eyes, and you need to be enlightened by science. Science is the truth. The opposite is actually the case. Christianity is not obscurantist. Christianity is the worldview that has given birth to science. Have you ever wondered? I mean, there's no doubt. Science was born in Europe, at least modern science. That doesn't mean that other cultures, other parts of the world hadn't been involved in scientific discovery and thinking throughout the ages. But science as we know it today was born in Europe. And then the rest of the world was blessed by it and carried it forward and maybe even have gone beyond Europe, certainly in many ways. But have you ever wondered, why was Christianity born was science born in Christian Europe and not in a Buddhist country and not in an animistic culture and not where they worship the spirits of the ancestors? Why was it born in Christian Europe? Because it was the theological conviction of Christianity that laid the foundations that allowed people to think scientifically. How? The Christian conviction was that man had been given domain in a good creation. They believed that the world was created in an ordered way. We saw that in the last session. Order out of chaos. And that there was a wise God that was giving order to creation. That there was rhyme and reason in creation. That there was logic. That the rules of nature were consistent. Just give you an example. How many of you took a plane to fly here? We all took a plane, yeah? Okay. Did any of you wonder if the law of gravity was going to stop working in mid-flight? Did anybody worry about that? Okay, now there's something new to worry about. Okay? No. We assume that the law of gravity and the laws of physics will be the same. Why? Because we think Christianly. We think that God created a world, created order, created the laws of physics, and that they are stable. Therefore, we can do science. That is the ontological foundation of scientific inquiry. It's been forgotten. It's in the suitcase that's been forgotten. But historically, that is what drove scientific inquiry. That scientific inquiry is based on the fact that there are laws of nature. Now, in a culture where there is no grand lawgiver, in a culture that is ruled by the belief in karma, for example, that is unpredictable, no one knows where karma comes from. No one knows what karma is written. No one knows if you're getting bad or good karma. No one knows if you're going to be reincarnated into a mouse or into a monk. Because karma is, who knows? You know, where's the book of karma? We don't know. Who established the law of karma? We don't know. Is there anyone? No, there's nirvana. Oh, okay. So where's laws? Don't know. They could come, they could go. Christianity believes in the grand lawgiver. And therefore there are laws that are stable. And we can study them. We can do science. Francis Bacon, again, he actually said that through science and technology, we can moderate the effects of original sin. We thus participate in the redemption of man and the execution of the Christian gospel as we do scientific inquiry. That was the vision of Sir Francis Bacon, one of the great founders of modern verse. which now has become standard teaching in most science classes. But had anyone told you that the Big Bang was originally devised by a Christian monk who was thinking about creation? Probably not. 3. A theology of time. This one's a little odd. Now, I don't only mean time as dividing up days into different hours and whatnot, although that as well, by the way, is a Christian thing. Do you know when in Europe we started to tell time? The first organization of the day into hours and time slots, which so much, at least those of you who are German, you understand time. You understand punctuality. You understand we start at, sharp on. Do you know where that started? It started in Christian monasteries, where the monks believed they had to divide up the day into different parts for their prayer times. And so they had Vespers and they had different prayer times. So they divided up the day into different times. And of course they had no watches, so they used bells. And the bells were used, ding dong, okay, time for prayer, then second time for prayer, and then the bells became standard feature in all European cities. And the bells were used to call people to go to work, call people to come home, call people to the public square if there's an emergency, and of course for prayers and for Sunday. And then from the bell, they developed the clock, the big clocks, and then the clocks in the home, and then the wristwatches, and now our smartphones and smartwatches and whatnot. But the origins of the division of time in such a way, which actually gave rise to the industrial age in Europe, was also a Christian thing. But here I want to say something a little differently, a little more broadly, and it is that the actual way that we think about time is a Christian way. What do I mean? So let me just give you the Christian theology of time. Basically, Christianity divides time into 3 grand phases. And here we're talking time in terms of the big historical time span of history. Okay? We believe there was a bad past. The bad past is called the fall. We believe there's a present work of redemption. The present, we've got work to do. And we believe in a future of salvation. Things are going to get better. Okay? This is the grand narrative of Christianity. Something bad in the past, work to be done in the present, something good in the future. Now, saying that almost sounds silly. It's obvious. Well, it's not. It has become obvious because of the influence of Christianity. Other cultures don't think that way, necessarily, of a bad past, of a work to do in the present, and of a good future. But in Europe, that way of thinking underlies everything that happened in European culture and history. Even atheists think like Christians in terms of time. Let me give you an example. Science, secular science, thinks like Christianity. A bad past of ignorance, a present of research, and a future of progress. Karl Marx, far from being a Christian, at least in the end of his life, thought of time like a Christian. A bad past of social injustice, a current present of revolution, and a future of social justice in the earth. Sigmund Freud thought like a Christian in time, a bad past of trauma, a present of analysis, a future of healing. The Industrial Revolution thought in Christian terms of time, a bad past of poverty, a present of technology and work and efficiency, and a future of well-being for humankind. And we could go on and on. You see, the basis, the foundations of European thinking of time are rooted in Christian theology. Christianity has put a positive spin on culture because we believe in a positive future. We are going somewhere, says the Christian message. And that has infiltrated European culture that says, yes, we are going somewhere. We've got to do something. We've got to do something in the present to make the future better because the past is bad. That is Christian thinking. And that has been a driver for much change in Europe. That's why Nietzsche said, the crazy man announces the death of God, after which all is futile. Number 4. We're halfway. 20 minutes of lunch. Okay, does that give you a little bit of hope? There's a better future coming. Number 4, a theology of liberty or freedom. Christianity was the great scenario of liberty and freedom, says the Italian philosopher Galimberti. Because Christianity says nature is not wild and unpredictable. It is governed by God's will, and that makes it good. Therefore, as man appropriately governs the world through free will, it will continue to be good. And so, free will, liberty, this idea is rooted in Christian theology. Liberty is there for the good of society. Now, liberty can mean many things. Let me just focus on the liberty from tyranny, so political liberty. And the main author here is J.S. Mill. He wrote a book on liberty, and he was a philosopher. He basically laid the foundations of much political philosophy in Europe and in the West and in many countries of the world today. And he actually had some background ideas, all of which were Christian. He said, human well-being is central. And we as Christians, that is our idea. Human well-being is central because God has created us. He's put us at the center of the world. He's the one who's loved us. He sent His Son to die for us. Human well-being is central. It aligns with Christian theology. Well-being is found in freedom of choice. And yes, we as Christians say, yes, this is our idea. We believe that God has given us freedom of choice. And in that freedom of choice, we become fully human. It is freedom. It is not under coercion and under tyranny that we will flourish. It is being free to choose between good and evil. Might is not right, which of course is a problem in our current democracies today, where so much is said, well, if the people believe it, it must be good. Well, I don't have to comment on some of our recent elections and recent referendums in Europe to claim that that is often, sadly, not the case. And this aligns with the biblical narrative of the fall that says, if you put a bunch of fallen people together, that doesn't make it good. It can make it bad. One of the great revolutions in European history was the French Revolution. What were the 3 grand ideas in the French Revolution? Any French here? Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Liberty, they're written there, yeah, you're cheating. Liberty, freedom, and fraternity. These were the great ideas of the French Revolution that really revolutionized Europe. All 3 are Christian ideas. Jesus announced liberty because we are all creatures of God. God's image says equality because there are no rich and poor, because God has created us equal. And fraternity because of charity, because that is the great commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. These are all Christian ideas. These shaped the future and the present of Europe. Let me scroll through the last 3. A theology of law. The whole European system is based on the assumption that you can punish people, right? So if you drive your car too fast and you hit someone and the police catch you, can the police punish you? Yes. Why? Because we believe that you are responsible. And therefore, if you're responsible, you are punishable. But why are you responsible? Back it up one more. You're responsible because you're free. Since you're free to drive as you wish, you are responsible to drive well. If you don't, you can be punished. Now, this is a Christian idea. If you look at Christian theology, it just turns it the other way around. We believe God has created us free, and therefore we are responsible, and therefore we can be punished on the basis of our responsibility. And so the entire European law system is based on punishment, responsibility, freedom, is actually a reinvention of Christian ideas on freedom and responsibility and punishment. Two more. Theology and education. The university was born in Christian Europe. From there, it went out and it blessed the rest of the world. But the university was born in Christian Europe. It was a meeting of the classical tradition and Christian theology. And this gave a distinct set of values whereby the idea of a university made sense. Otherwise, it didn't. Let me just show these to you. First, medieval academics believed in a word of order created by God, which is rational and accessible to human reason. A theology of economy. And again, a lot could be said here. One main book here is written by a sociologist by the name Max Weber called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Bit of a landmark book in sociology and in thinking on capitalism. And what Weber does, he says, capitalism began with the observation that to pursue profit was a virtuous thing. Now, where did that idea come from? Weber says the idea that the pursuit of profit was a virtuous thing came from Protestantism. He said, first, because Protestantism spoke of a worldly calling that gives worldly activity a religious character. So things that you're doing in the world, the Protestant says, those are actually good. They believed in common grace. They believed in the cultural mandate. But secondly, this is really interesting. Max Weber, he said that the idea of Calvinism, of capitalism, came from Calvin's belief in predestination. Now, I don't know what you think about predestination, but what Calvin said, he says, we are all predestined to either be saved or to be damned, and there's not much you can do about it. Now, if that's true, we're all very worried about which side we're on. Have we picked the short straw or the long straw? Are we saved or are we not saved? And so for Protestant thinkers who were convinced by what Calvin had said about predestination, they were obsessed with the thought, am I saved or not? And they decided one of the ways you know that you've been predestined by God to be saved is if you have material prosperity. If you do well in business, now these are Germans, if you do well in business, if you make a profit, if you use your industry to make a profit and you are blessed in that, that is a sign that God has predestined you and you're saved. That, says Max Weber, was the spark of capitalism, which rules the world today. Maybe some of us wish it didn't. But regardless of our assessment of capitalism and of whether Calvin was right or not on all of that, and whether they were right to say that prosperity is the sign of God's blessing on you, I have doubts about that. You could ask maybe Stephen's wife, the martyr Stephen, his wife, what does she think about the prosperity gospel? I don't know. Anyway, but that's another topic. But historically, what I'm trying to say is that Christian theology, once again, is seen at a crucial juncture in European history in shaping the future, in this case, the economic future. So my final one is a theology of goodness and virtue. This is the shortest one because we're going to do it tomorrow. Okay? We have all morning tomorrow to do this one here. So I just put it in here for completeness, but it's the shortest one, and it just says to be continued tomorrow morning. In conclusion, we're not going to do this because it's late in the day, but you may want to do this on your own. Go on your internet and find the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. This is the charter that gives the fundamental rights to European citizens. This is at the foundation of what it means to be European. Interestingly, the roots of this, the Charter actually says, conscious of its spiritual and moral heritage, this is what we believe. Now, it used to say religious heritage. Now they've moved it to spiritual and moral. But even the European founding fathers, they recognized that there was a forgotten suitcase. They had looked into that. And they recognized there are things in the spiritual, Christian, and moral heritage of Europe that have shaped our fundamental rights today. And these fundamental rights are dignity, freedoms, equality, solidarity, citizens' rights, and justice. And once again, we could look at each one of these and see how they are deeply embedded into Christian thinking, and their roots are found in Christian theology. So, do we have a great story to tell or what? Yeah? Do we have some glory to show? If we say, let his glory be seen, is looking into the past of Europe, into some of the areas of which we've only scratched the surface, does that give you a feeling of greater boldness as you walk out into the world as a carrier of this tradition? Does this give you a vision? Maybe some of the young people in this room. Maybe God has called you to be a pastor, a minister, a missionary, an evangelist, whatever. If that is what God is calling to you, blessings, that is great. But maybe there's some here in the room who God is not calling to do that. He's calling you to be a musician, the next Beethoven. He's calling you to be a scientist, the next Francis Bacon. Would we broaden what we see as a vision of the Missio Dei to include the entire landscape, and so his glory may be seen through us, through the church, in culture, in society, for the glory of God. Amen.